Hey folks, welcome to episode 9 of Tea and Type, your time to chill and make words. I'm MK England.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jamie Pacton, and tonight we're talking books from childhood, why we write, and other things that influence us. And, we're right in the middle of this project, start to finish, where we're looking at the ways we grow novels. And so last week we talked about creating characters, and we wanted to do this episode, one, to take a pause, because next week we're going to have our good friend and fellow Pitch Wars 15 mentee, Joan Hay, in here to talk about story structure and different ways that different cultures create stories. And so we'll be moving more back into the technical stuff of project start to finish. But now we kind of think that this is part of it too, though, right? Because every time you're creating a story, you're also thinking back to some of your references, both as a child and as a teenager, and the books that shaped you. So that's what we're talking tonight. And we would love if you tell us in Twitter replies or in the notes or in the comments, books that shaped you. But first, before that, as always, what are you drinking?
I am kind of drinking mystery tea today. I took this trip to Germany in like 2009 or 2010 or something, and I just blew way too much money on tea and brought it all back, and then it all spilled, and then it all got put in like little Ziploc baggies that are only like half of them are labeled. So I don't know, this is something like orangey that was labeled in German. There you go. What about you, Jamie?
I'm
You're rocking your usual.
squirt tea. It's so yummy. Yeah. Yes. All right. That's out of the way. So let's see.
Topic of the week then. Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, just, so books reshaped us and how that informs our writing. So I know for me, I am always, I think, writing for the kid that I was and the teen that I was, especially. I kind of feel like a lot of the books that shaped me as far as who I am today, I really didn't get to until after I graduated college, when I started diving into YA fiction and finally finding like LGBT literature, and I was like, this is my niche. This is, this is what I love. I definitely still had things I clung to as a kid, but I think I'm always sort of trying to fill those gaps when I'm writing. I want to find that story that like kid Megan or teenage Megan would have absolutely gone nuts for and would have seen herself in and just, identified with so strongly. Did you have any particular books in your childhood that just absolutely changed your life or that you feel coming through in your writing?
Yeah, I did. And I will get to that in just a minute. I will say that Kid Jamie, first of all, I break it down into I see my reading in different phases. So I was the oldest of 10 kids, and I grew up in a very strict Catholic household. Like, we watched videos about rock music and the occult and why it was bad, kind of thing. Yeah. And so, but my parents, the one thing that they didn't censor for me was reading. I could read whatever I wanted. So I read voraciously. As a young girl, I was a little bit, you hear about girls with Asperger's who get into moments, and I read nothing but horses for 15 months, and then nothing but something else, fairy tales or something like that. So I tended to obsess. I would read an entire series. So I read all of the Hardy Boys, all the Nancy Drews, all the Boxcar Children. I'm a completionist as well. So that was me as a kid. And then in high school, I was taking AP literature classes, and so I really was reading deeply in the traditional canon of Western literature. So you'd find me on a given Saturday sunbathing on my parents' deck, getting a sunburn and reading Russian literature. And that was what I did for fun. Yeah. And so and then as an adult, we were just talking about this before the show, there really wasn't YA literature when I was growing up. I mean, I'm sure there were little bits, but not in the same robust way. And so I would have loved, oh my God, to have run into Leigh Bardugo at 17, my world would have changed completely. But I didn't get there until I was in my 30s, And so that's a different thing too. And now it's rare that I go back and I read literary fiction. I tend to read much more YA now, or I read the occasional thriller, or I read nonfiction. Anyways, you asked me about the book that shaped me. I have it right here. This is the Shirley Temple storybook. This was one of the only books at my grandmother's house that was for kids. My grandmother was a librarian and kind of mean, and she loved me dearly, but she did not feel as much affection for my other brothers and sisters. So she like sat me down and gave me this book. And so all the other books in her house were like super trashy pulp novels that unfortunately my father destroyed when my grandmother died, which is terrible. And like I wanted those books so bad. But this is the book. And so I would sit at my grandmother's house and I would go to her house for weeks at a time. And this is what I did. I would do this and then I'd play tennis. And so, hang on, I'm almost done, I swear. And so anyways, before she died, she left me a sweet little inscription, right? To bring me with love. How many happy hours of reading. I get a little emotional when I see that. But one of the first YA novels I ever wrote, actually, is I retold the story of the wild swans from this book. Hang on, I'll show you the pictures. They're great. And I retold it almost verbatim, actually. And that's why some of the twists and turns make no sense, because I was so very devoted to telling this story. And I love this image right here. All right, so this is our princess. She's going off to find nettles, and she goes into the churchyard, and you see these creepy little golem creatures.
Yeah.
Those are lamia in the story. And then in folk tales, lamia are actually women who were half women, half snakes. And so I was, one of my big questions when I transitioned from this book I loved as a child, and I obsessed over the pictures, and I used to draw them, is with these questions of what are these snake women doing in the middle of this church or in the middle of the story. And so I wrote this really creepy, weird, dark fairy tale that kind of has all this snake mythology throughout it. And so when I think of books that really influenced me, like that one is my go-to. But there's a really long answer. All right. What about other books for you? Or, other things?
Yeah. I think it's so funny because we have almost been opposite in some ways. I was an avowed classics hater. Like, I refused to take AP English or any of that because all they read were classics, and I thought they were so boring, and I hated them. And like, I'll turn in my librarian card right now because I still kind of hate most classics.
You should. They are dusty and white and privileged.
But even like Jane Austen, I just can't read. I know. I'm sorry. Please fire me. It's fine. I have actually been going back and reading some classics, and I can find a lot more meaning in them now as an adult. As a teenager, I just would have been like, do not care, whatever. Where's the next Star Wars novel?
Dude, I was watching like Tolstoy plays in like 15, right? Weird.
Yeah, no, I think I can go back and read Frankenstein. I can rock me some Mary Shelley. I've gone back and read some like, 40s, 50s, 60s sci-fi and spec fic that I find very interesting, misogynistic, but interesting. But what really did it for me as a kid was Star Wars novels. And like, I'm living in like a little rental house right now, so I can't show you, but I actually have like an entire bookshelf, like floor to ceiling bookshelf full of nothing but Star Wars novels. And it was all I read from probably third grade through senior year.
I think is amazing. That's what I do with my kid, is just try and say, like, what do you like? What do you want to read? And so he keeps reading the same, Captain Underpants books. Mm-hmm. But oh my God, he is so engaged with it. I had a lot of pressure and a lot of anxiety to be a smart girl and to like read those kinds of novels. And so I think half of the classics went way over my head, or I was sort of insufferable by the time I got to college, because I was very educated and very literary. And, but so then the book that broke it open for me, when I met my husband, he had Star Wars novels, and he had a ton of Dragonlance novels and the Deathgate cycle, and he's like, you need to read these. And so I sat down and I read the entire Deathgate cycle, and I was like, oh, books can be fun. Books can be. And I always read fantasy on the side and stuff, but I always felt like I was cheating. I was a big Mercedes Lackey fan, but it was like my guilty pleasure, And so I love that you still have those Star Wars novels. Keep those forever.
Oh God, I will never get rid of them. Never.
Do you still read them, or are you like?
I just don't have a lot of time to sit down and read anymore. So I don't reread as much as I used to. Some of them are falling apart, and I have reread them in adulthood. There's an X-Wing series that I just really like. I love that series a whole lot, but I actually just finished a Star Wars novel like 4 hours ago. I just finished reading. Actually, well, this is my recommendation for today, so I'll save it. But it's great. It's really great. It's reignited my passion for Star Wars novels, and I'm very excited.
But I
Um,
think that that's when I think about like why do I write or why who was I as a kid? It was that kid who would shut out the world, shut out her nine siblings. We could be on a road trip for, 30-hour road trip, and I would be deep in my book, like because I would bring those kinds of fun books. So that's who I want to write to, or those are kind of books I want to write, these books that just drag you in and you're like, what? It's 4 hours have gone by,
Yeah,
Um,
I think there are sort of two things that I really got from the things that I read as not so much as a kid, but as a teenager. I don't remember a whole lot of my reading from childhood other than Star Wars novels. Like I read some of the Junior Jedi Knights and the Young Jedi Knights, but I really read like the adult Star Wars novels from like third grade on, and I would just read every single one. And I think between that and Dragon Riders of Pern and all of that sort of sci-fi fantasy stuff, I just loved that it made me feel like I could go on adventures and I could be powerful and, go on and do great things in the universe and all of that. And that's still one of the things that I love about Star Wars is that it just carries you away into this entire other universe where you can be a hero. And then I also read like the entire Ender's series, like all of the Ender books and the Bean books, like the
yeah.
two series that went side by side. And I love those for a very different reason. I guess because they I guess they put people in very hard situations. And I don't know, that was my version of being like a smart, stuffy teenager, I guess. I did not read Russian literature. I read like the children of the mind and got all philosophical about that or something. Like, why are we all douches as teenagers? I don't know why this is.
True story. The
Like,
first time I met my husband, we were smoking and we had both just finished the same Dostoevsky novel. And we were
oh
like,
god, that sounds insufferable. I'm sorry.
I mean, we also then went to a punk show, so it was just
Oh,
balanced.
okay.
But
Yeah. I
funny.
just like,
I mean,
as a teen librarian, like all the teens that I hang out with these days seem way cooler than I was as a teenager.
yes.
Like,
But I also think
good
they've
god.
also got this rich body of books about teenagers and in many different situations and all sorts of like, I mean, like my teen self is so jealous of the books that are available for teenagers now,
Me
really,
too.
like it would have changed my life. um One thing I've been dying to ask you, and I want you to say your book, but so hold this question, but I'm dying to know about the first thing you ever wrote. What was it? Was it like some little like picture book when you were a kid, or what's the
Oh
first
my
thing you
god, I
remember?
actually really clearly remember, and it's makes total sense. I think it was in like third grade, I want to say. This is the first thing that I clearly remember. And we did this little like young authors conference thing or something, and where we would write a short story, and then of course, at the time, like computers were not so much of a thing, so like it would get sent off to the media center or whatever, where like one person would have Microsoft Word and some clip art and like make you a little cover.
I
So
remember this so much.
so they would like bind it up for you and make you a little cover and everything. And it was
Little
a
dot
story about two
matrix.
aliens who went to Neptune to collect some of the blue gas because that is what they ate. And so it was just like their trip to go like collect this gas. And then of course something went terribly wrong because that's what happens in stories. And I don't remember the exact details. And my parents sadly are not able to find this book. I desperately wanted to like go back and read it, but yes. So my first like little book that I ever wrote was sci-fi, and it was aliens and shit. Of
That's
course.
perfect. So
What about you?
So I did write like I was a storyteller. I made my brothers and sisters participate in all the plays that I wrote, including jacked up versions of Wind in the Willows. And we were the type of family that memorized a lot of films and did scripts for the whole thing. Anyway, so I know that there were little stories like that. The first thing I clearly remember writing, I think I was probably like 10 or 11, and I sat down and my parents had a computer because my dad was an engineer. And so I was typing on the computer.
Mhm.
Um, and it was a story about someone who like was in a coma and they had this big like life and they thought it was their life and they had a family and a wife, and then they had a coffee mug and their coffee mug broke and they started like scraping at the wall, and then they came out of their coma and they realized the whole thing was a fake and
That's some
weird
dark shit,
like
Jamie.
I was like 10 and I couldn't find it. Yeah, I mean, there's some dark corners in
Yeah,
myself.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But now, here, I'll show you this. I know we're almost out of time, but now I tell my kids, that's a lot of stories I write now. I actually don't write these, but a lot of stories I want to write are stories I tell my kids. So we're in the middle of a series about the 50-pound wolf, which is named after our tiny little dog who thinks he's a 50-pound wolf. And so here's a
Aw.
picture he drew, a 50-pound wolf trying to see a shark, and the shark saying, "Hello, lunch."
Oh my
And
gosh.
so we do
That's
a lot
great.
of that here. And so I will be damned if my kid ever becomes an author. 'Cause I've got all of his first things, and they're all in a box. They're like Elliot's first comic books, and so don't worry.
So
I'm
excited to
correcting the
embarrass him
mistakes
one
of the
day.
past. All right. So what's your other question?
My last question to wrap this up is if you could take one book and go back and hand it to your, your young self, what do you think you would give? And that's a tough question, like right on the spot.
You gonna answer that yourself first?
I think so. I don't have like the one book because I'm sure if I like actually thought about all of my books, I would come up with something better. But like Carry On by Rainbow Rowell happened to be just like sitting right behind me, and I turned and looked at it and I was like, it's gay, it's wizards, it's like, I would have loved this and it would have done so much for me. Like there was nothing in terms of LGBT literature when I was a teen. And it would have just meant so much. And I already loved Harry Potter and fantasy and everything. So I would have binged it just like I did the day it came out.
I think that is exactly true for a lot of people we know, and I think it would have shaped lives differently. I mean, absolutely. Like I think about when my brother came out, and I just like, it felt like it was such a big revelation, and he was so alone in it. And if we could have talked about some of this through books that we gave, and I mean, like, it just, I see it happening differently, hopefully, for kids these days because of that. What would I have given myself? First of all, I forgot to add, as a stuffy teenager, I also loved The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy with
Oh,
a
me
passion of like
too.
burning fires, and I thought it was so funny. And so I read these other super serious books because I thought I had to, but like Hitchhikers and Mercedes Lackey, these were more my wheelhouse as a human. What would I give myself? I'd probably give myself Six of Crows, and here's why: because that's a book I would read and read and read and read over and over. It would have made me understand what was possible in terms of like books for teenagers, and also like ensemble casts and the like grand amount of diversity and variety and intensity that like relationships could have in a book for teenagers, while also telling a hell of a good story in this beautifully built world. And I think it's no coincidence, I will say this, that many of the younger 20-something writers that we know, they all cite Six of Crows as a strong influence, because I think you're reading that as you're learning how to world build, and it's just magnificent. You know what I mean? It really makes you pay attention to every cup of tea that's poured in your town, and how like the scroll work on your building is done in a way that like, I don't know if I'm sure other books do that, but so I would have given myself that book, and I think it would have made me really think differently about writing. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah. That's
Tough
awesome. Good
question.
answer. Yeah, tough question that I thought of right at the last second. Sorry.
Okay, I know we're almost done. Let's see. What's your recommendation?
All right. Okay. So I have not read a Star Wars book that wasn't a reread for me in quite a long time, because I sort of drifted away from it. Mostly because I didn't like where they were going with things. They kind of started this new story arc, and I was not into it at all. So I just drifted away from it for several years. But now they're hiring a whole bunch of really awesome YA authors to write some books. So I just read Bloodlines by Claudia Gray, who also writes a lot of wonderful YA sci-fi. And it is a very Princess Leia-centric book. And it's set about 5 years before The Force Awakens. And dear God, it was so good, and it absolutely like reignited my fire to read all the Star Wars things. So she's written one other Star Wars book that I think was more YA called Lost Stars, and Beth Revis also wrote Rebel Rising, which is more of a Rogue One era book. So those are absolutely up next. I'm super psyched.
I can't wait. I love these recommendations. All right, I'm going to grab those, definitely.
Definitely do. The audiobooks if you can, because Star Wars is known for like really high quality like production quality of their audiobooks. They do music and sound effects and all kinds of stuff. So
awesome.
Really
I'll totally do that. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. My recommendations this week are to sometimes give yourself some candy to make yourself sane. I am drafting a new book. I just passed 20,000 words. I'm super excited about it. When I get into drafting phases, I tend to read lighter and I tend to watch lighter. So over the past week, I've watched A Knight's Tale, Empire Records, rewatched. And I am extremely enjoying season 9 of American Ninja Warrior with my family and on my own.
Nice.
And then I'm reading a Daniel Silva like thriller book. I will say this briefly. American Ninja Warrior is a very good metaphor for the publishing industry. Okay, and here's why. Because I've had 3 friends get big book deals recently. I've had someone I know today who got an incredible amount of attention from agents through a contest. And I am extremely freaking happy for them. I'm so happy. But like the ninjas, I've been training on this too. And, you know, everybody could fall in a different obstacle. The course is different for every person. The journey is different. I mean, you know, you can take this metaphor and run with it as far as you want. But you see things like I saw this one story. I'm sorry, I swear to God, I'm almost done. This one story, this mom who, this is tragic, all right? So her 5-year-old, cute little like tow-headed boy, like went to school, came home like a little bit sick. Turns out he had a brain tumor. He was dead like in a month or 2 after that. And so, I mean, just horrible grief-stricken family. So they do an American Ninja Warrior. They tell all these stories, right? I've actually started crying before. Anyway, so this mom decides to start training, and so she trains, and it's all for her kid, and she goes through, and she falls pretty early, right? Like, I'm not spoiling anything, but she doesn't get very far, and you could just see on her face, she's like, oh, you know, because it's this thing that was supposed to get her through her grief. And in fact, I think it did, and it sort of drives home this point of, like, it is more about the work you do to get there than actually what happens once you're there. That's important too, but that is not the sum total of all of the accomplishments that you've had, right? So there's where the metaphor is really going here to publishing. And so for whatever reasons we write, whatever motivations, and that was something we were kind of talk about, you know, oh gosh, I'm lost the thread of this metaphor, but American Ninja Warrior is a metaphor for the publishing journey. That's my takeaway. Sorry. Yeah. All right.
No, it's all good. It actually made me laugh because A Knight's Tale is one of the like bad sick day movies that constantly plays in this household. It's just one of those things. Anyway, writing sprints today. For writing sprints today, I am going to be facing down the blank page and trying to actually start a book.
That's exciting.
I theoretically know how to do, and yet it's been like a week and I can't. How about you? You gonna add to your 20,000 words today?
So on my calendar, I say like 2,000 words a day, and I got behind. So I was supposed to hit 30 yesterday, 30K. And so I'm supposed to hit 32 today. So can I write 11,000 words in the next 3 hours?
I believe in you. You can do it. Actually, no, please go get a cocktail. Like, that's nuts.
I'm going to do some of that, maybe 1,000 or something on the new book.
Great.
So anyway,
all right,
lovely talking to you.
Yes.
Have a good night.
Great to talk to you as always. Everybody else, come join us over on Twitter for some writing sprints. This has been Tea and Type. Let's go make some words together. Bye.
Bye, guys.